In this issue, we will discuss the work Snow Country by Kawabata Yasunari, the first Japanese writer to win the Nobel Prize in Literature. This work, which was intermittently published for 12 years from 1935 through World War II, and then revised and completed over a long period of time, expresses a profoundly Japanese sense of beauty as it depicts the lives of dedicated women in a hot spring inn in Yuzawa, Niigata Prefecture, at the end of the Shimizu Tunnel on the Jotsu border, which the author herself had visited. This book is recommended for readers who enjoy human dramas that skillfully depict detailed emotional swings and for readers interested in the unique Japanese aesthetic. You may deepen your understanding of the world of the story by researching the background of the real-life models of the geisha Kamako and the hot spring resort that appear in the work. There are 4 main characters. Shimamura is a well-to-do writer in Tokyo who used to be involved in the study of Japanese dance. Kamako, who has returned to Snow Country to become a geisha after her master became ill and sold her to Tokyo. Yoko is the lover of Yukio, who is rumored to be Kamako's fiancé, and takes care of him when he is ill. Then Yukio is the son of the master who taught Kamako Japanese dance and is a childhood friend of Kamako. A man of worldly cares steps into the Snow Country, a mountainous region with 2 contradictory aspects of beautiful snowy scenery and extreme cold and solitude. The transient nature of beauty and the transient nature of its disappearance were part of the daily lives of the women who lived in the area. On the train, passing through a tunnel on the border between prefectures and heading for the northern winter country, Shimamura, who had come from Tokyo, was remembering Kamako, whom he was about to meet. He first met her early last summer, when that Snow Country was entering its fresh mountaineering season. Shimamura, who was enjoying his leisurely life, visited a hot spring resort after hiking in the mountains and asked the maid to call a geisha for him. Unfortunately, the village playhouse called Mayukura was so crowded with guests that it was used as a banquet hall to celebrate the completion of road construction, and all the geisha were gone. The maid said, if it is a girl who is apprenticed in Japanese dancing, she might be able to come. After a while, Kamako came to his room, and when Shimamura told her about kabuki, which he had been familiar with since he was a child, she opened up to him and came to visit him again the next day. Shimamura felt a kind of friendship and asked Kamako, take care of one geisha for me. She said reluctantly, it's true that people who don't even say they love you at the time are more likely to remember you even after you break up with them. It is usually those people who remember and write to me, she said as she left the room. Shimamura, who had been casually entranced by the view of the mountains without talking to the young mountain village geisha whom the maid had called for him, was not amused and left the room together with her without doing anything with her. Shimamura went for a walk in the hills behind the inn and bumped into Kamako, who was cooling off at a shrine in a cedar forest. I went to your room earlier, but you weren't there. I saw you going up the mountain from my window, so I brought you some cigarettes that you had left behind. At that moment, Shimamura finally realizes that he just wanted this woman from the beginning. That night, Kamako, who had been invited to drink alcohol by a familiar customer, came to the hallway and called out loudly for Shimamura. She staggered into the room, leaned over to him and said, I shouldn't. I told you we should have been friends. I'm not that kind of woman. You lost. You are laughing at me. I know you are laughing deep down. If you are not laughing now, you will laugh later, she sobbed. After regaining her composure and sobering up, Kamako spent the night with Shimamura, and when she fixed her hair and slipped out of the room to avoid being seen before the innkeeper woke up, Shimamura also returned to Tokyo where his wife and children lived later that day. And now, on the train on his way to see Kamako again, he rubbed his finger across the fogged windowpane, recalling the sensation of touching her, and saw the beautiful one eye of the woman caring for the sick in the seat across from him, one seat in front. The man and woman appear to be in a vision, as if they are going to an endless distance, and Shimamura sees the fire of wildfire in her face and is fascinated by her beauty. Shimamura eventually gets off the arriving train and unexpectedly sees Yoko and Yukio getting off at the same station. Shimamura, who had never been to a snow country in winter before, was surprised at how cold it was outside, and was intimidated by the large snow gear of the woman wearing a cape and looking out the waiting room window at the railroad tracks, and the innkeeper touting for customers. As Shimamura walked to the inn, he asked, "Is the girl who studied at the Japanese dance master still there?" The innkeeper replied, "Yes, she was at the station, but have you seen her? She went to pick up the master's son, who was leaving on the last train of the day." Ah, that was Kamako who was wearing that hood. The sick man who was being cared for by Yoko in the mirror of the train window was the son of Kamako's master. What are the circumstances between the woman who remembers the touch and the woman with the burning eyes? When Shimamura came out of the bath, the guests at the inn were already asleep, and Kamako, now a geisha, was standing at a corner of a long hallway. When Kamako stands silently and tries to smile with her dark white powder makeup face, holding back tears as Shimamura rushes over to her, Shimamura reflects on his disloyalty to her for not writing to her, not coming to see her, and not fulfilling his promise to send her a book of dancing formulas. They walk to their rooms in silence, feeling nostalgic for each other, and then get into their kotatsu and count the number of days they have not seen each other until today. "How can you remember that it's day 199? Kamako said, "I've been keeping a diary since before I was sold to Tokyo. It's just a little diary about novels I read, just writing down the titles, authors, and the names of the characters and their relationships with each other. I can't write down my impressions." When Shimamura muttered, "That's a waste of time," she nodded brightly and looked out the window at the frozen nightscape. Then, after spending some time together in the hot spring, Kamako realized that night was falling and returned to the home of the dance master with whom she lived. Shimamura walks down the hill, admiring the beautiful scenery from the inn's windows, and passes under the eaves where several geisha are standing around talking. Kamako, who was there, followed Shimamura and invited him to her home. There is a sick man with intestinal tuberculosis at her dance master's house, and Shimamura recalls that he is the passenger he saw on the train last night. The woman who was taking care of him, is she from Tokyo? Is she his wife? Kamako did not answer that question, but grumbled, "Why didn't you tell me about that yesterday?" The master's son, Yukio, an invalid, was born in a port town. He loved machines from an early age and worked for a watchmaker. After his mother, who was a geisha, had paralyzed and returned alone to her hometown to recuperate, he went to Tokyo to attend night school. When Kamako had finished saying all that, Yoko passed by the earthen floor with a bottle of the sick man's urine, and Shimamura was once again captivated by her fiery eyes and beautiful voice. After leaving their house, Shimamura approached a blind masseur who passed by and invited him to his inn for a massage in his room. While the masseur was relaxing Shimamura's body, she listened to the sound of shamisen music. Recently, a young geisha named Kamako has become very good, she told Shimamura, who was interested in the story. It seems that Kamako, who is married to a master in Tokyo, chose to become a geisha this summer so that her son could receive treatment for intestinal tuberculosis and send money for his treatment. When Shimamura hears the unexpected, he feels that Kamako's situation is so futile that Yukio, her fiancé, whom she had gone to the trouble of selling herself to get medical treatment, has returned with a new lover, Yoko, and he will eventually die, and he is strongly attracted to her purity and devotion to the cause. The next morning, Shimamura woke up to find Kamako, who had failed to return home, unable to leave her room for fear that people would find her. When Kamako said, "I should have gone home early last night and practiced the shamisen because it sounds different when the weather is this nice," Shimamura suggested that she should practice here, and Kamako called home and told Yoko to bring a book of Nagata songs along with a change of clothes. When Shimamura asked about the gossip he heard from his masseuse yesterday, Kamako replied, the master just took the liberty of hoping that her son would eventually join me, and nothing happened between the two of us. But when I was sold to Tokyo, he was the only one to see me off. At the very beginning of my earliest diary, I wrote about it. How can someone who is dying stop me from spending time in this room as I please? Eventually, Yoko came in with a beautiful voice calling out, "Kamako," and after handing over the requested item, she silently left. As Kamako tuned the strings, opened her practice book, and sang lively while playing a complex tune she had learned on her own, Shimamura felt that even the feudal life of Kamako was beautifully expressed by her own worth. On the afternoon of the day Shimamura returns to Tokyo, Kamako comes to the station to see him off together. Yoko rushed after them as they were walking in the square in front of the station, grabbed Kamako by the shoulders, and said with a cough, "Yukio is acting strange. He's calling for you." But Kamako replied, "No, I don't want to. I can't leave because I'm taking a customer home." She's shaking Yoko off and staggering away. Yoko grabs Shimamura's hand and says, "Excuse me. Please let him go." Shimamura nodded and persuaded Kamako to let him go. "I don't know what's going on between you three, but I'm here to tell you that he's dying. He wants to see you. Go home. He was the only one who saw you off on your way to Tokyo. If you don't take care of the person you wrote about at the beginning of your oldest diary, you will regret it for the rest of your life." She said, "No. You misunderstand me. I can't keep a diary anymore. I'm going to burn it." Then she muttered, "You are so honest. If you don't laugh at me, I can send you the entire diary." After Yoko left first, Shimamura looked out the train window at Kamako standing in the waiting room and felt a sense of separation from reality. The monotonous sound of the train as it started running began to sound like a woman's words to Shimamura, and those words, proof that she was living life to the fullest, were slipping away, and the train went through a long tunnel at the border. 2 years later, in the fall, Shimamura came to a hot spring resort in snow country for the 3rd time. Kamako chides him for making her wait so long and reports what happened in the meantime. The last time she saw Shimamura off at the train station on his way back to Tokyo, Yukio had died. After that, she quit her job as a geisha and returned to her parents' house in a port town to nurse her master when she heard that he had pneumonia. After her master passed away, she returned to the area and went back to work, now living in an okiya where geisha are sent to work. Speaking of Yoko, all she does is visit Yukio's grave. She also confided to Shimamura that she actually has a husband in the port town who has been with her since she was 17, but she still hasn't been able to open up to him and has always wanted to leave him. They go outside for a walk, and when Shimamura suddenly asks, "Well, why don't we go to the grave of your fiancé?" Kamako throws a chestnut from the ground in his face and makes an accusation at him. "Why do you call me his fiancé? You think I am a fool? What business is it of yours that you want me to visit his grave? What are you getting so worked up about?" Kamako says to Shimamura, who shows no sign of anger at having a chestnut placed on his forehead. "It was a serious thing for me. I've never visited his grave before, so I'm sticking to it. It's true. People in Tokyo are so complicated, I don't understand. The noise around here must be distracting. You'll probably end up dying." And she took Shimamura to Yukio's grave. Yoko is at the old stone monument that lines one of the footpaths along the railroad tracks, and when she looks at them with those fiery, serious eyes, Shimamura bows and stops. Then a freight train came running close by, and a boy walked past the door waving his hat and saying, "Sister." Yoko also called out in that beautiful voice, "Seichiro," and as the freight train goes away, she murmurs, "My brother was on the train, so maybe I should go to the station." When Kamako said, I don't visit Yukio's grave," Yoko nodded, hesitated a little, squatted in front of the grave, put her hands together, and went home. Kamako grumbled to Shimamura, who was looking at Yoko's backside. Oh, I interrupted her visit to the grave because you spoke out of turn. That's because you don't understand my feelings. On his way home from a walk, Shimamura suddenly looked at the inn's reception desk and saw Yoko sitting by the fireside, being taught menial tasks by the proprietress who was keeping watch over the hot sake. Kamako drops by Shimamura's room between banquets and reports on the banquet, saying that she is too busy to leave because there is a shortage of geisha to deal with the group guests, and after a drink of water, she quickly returns to work again. For some reason, the thought of Yoko's presence at this inn makes Shimamura hesitate to invite Kamako into his room, and he pities her beautiful self-sacrifice in directing her affections toward him, and equally pities his own. One night, after a series of such incidents, Yoko appeared in Shimamura's room, saying, "I beg your pardon," and handed him a letter saying, "Kamako sent this," and left. The letter reads in a drunken script, "I am now drinking and making merry." But soon Kamako arrives with drunken gait and says to Shimamura, "Did she just bring me something?" She brought sake to the banquet and stood in the shadows of the hallway, staring at me with a twinkle in her eye. So I wrote her a note saying, "Take this with you." What did she say? You love those eyes, don't you? Did you know she's terribly jealous? She looked into the mirror as if she were about to fall over and said, "You won't know which one of us is the shallow one until you try to seduce her," and straightened her kimono and left. Eventually, when the din of the banquet that had been heard had died down, Yoko reappeared with Kamako's letter, and when Shimamura thanked her and spoke to her, Yoko said, "Please take good care of Kamako. But there's nothing I can do for you." "Maybe I should go back to Tokyo as soon as possible," Shimamura replied. Yoko looked at him seriously and said, "Please take me back to Tokyo, too. I don't have a job in Tokyo, but my brother is the only family I have left, and I can decide on my own." Shimamura was surprised and asked, "Have you talked to Kamako about it?" When Yoko replied, "I hate Kamako, so I don't tell her," Shimamura's affection for Kamako deepened. "Aren't you afraid of going with a man? It's dangerous if you don't know where to settle down in Tokyo. What were you doing last time you were in Tokyo?" "I wanted to be a nurse. But I don't want to be a nurse anymore. I only take care of one person." "Even so, how can you leave his grave and go to Tokyo? Wasn't that man Kamako's fiancé?" "Kamako's? Not exactly." Yoko looks at Shimamura with a glare and says, "Please take care of Kamako," to which Shimamura again replies, "I can't do anything for you." With tears in her eyes, Yoko cries and leaves the room. Kamako says, "I'm going crazy." Kamako came to his room a little later, and on the way to take her home, Shimamura told her, "That girl earnestly asked me to take care of you. I don't know why you are so strangely stubborn when it comes to her, too." Kamako says, "You want her. I have a feeling she's going to become my painful burden sooner or later. But if it's you, maybe she won't have to go crazy. Hey, why don't you take her away before she becomes a burden to me? I'll lose myself in these mountains thinking she's adored by you." At Kamako's invitation, Shimamura entered the house and went up to her room, where he found many diaries that had been left there. When Shimamura muttered, "You are a good woman," Kamako replied, "When I first met you, I thought what a rude and disgusting person you are. If you start making women say things like this, you're finished." "What do you mean by a good woman? I knew you were laughing at me." "Oh, I'm so frustrated," she cried, her shoulders shaking with anger, and she thrust her hairpin into the tatami mat. During his long sojourn, during which he seemed to forget to return to Tokyo with his wife and children, Shimamura had a habit of waiting for Kamako to come visit him in his room, and the more wistfully she came to him, the more remorseful he felt as if he were not alive. At the same time that he feels that he will never come back to this place again, he realizes that he must leave it immediately, and Shimamura takes an excursion to a textile production area as an opportunity to do so. But with nothing in particular to see, he simply strolled the town until dark and returned to the hot spring resort where Kamako was located. Kamako jumped out in front of the car carrying him to the inn and said, "Hey, where have you been? Why didn't you take me with you?" and is questioning Shimamura when suddenly a bell rings, signaling a fire. When they turned around, they saw that a fire was raging in the Mayukura in the village below. They rushed out, and when they heard from a passerby that a film from a movie was on fire in the Mayukura where they were showing a movie tonight, Kamako told Shimamura, "You don't have to come. I am worried about the people in my village," and stopped her footsteps. The beautiful Milky Way spreads across the night sky as a distracted Shimamura looks up, and Kamako, still looking up at the clear night sky, starts running again. At Mayukura, the site of the fire, firefighters were surrounding the area and sending water to the pumps. Kamako told Shimamura, who followed her, "When you go back to Tokyo, I will live a serious life," and watched the burning flames of Mayukura with the villagers. Mayukura's roof and walls are half burned down, and flames and black smoke are rising again from other places where the fire has spread. At that moment, Yoko's fainting body fell from Mayukura's low second floor. While Shimamura gasped for breath, Kamako gasped, held both eyes, pushed through the crowd, and held Yoko's body in her arms, shouting, "She is crazy. She is insane." Shimamura, looking at Kamako holding Yoko as if she were embracing him in sacrifice or punishment, felt the Milky Way cascading down into his own being. Kamako's affection was for Shimamura, but he had the emptiness to think of it as if it were a beautiful waste of time. It was as if the life Kamako was trying to live touched him like naked skin. He pitied Kamako, but also pitied himself. Shimamura was also attracted to Yoko because he felt that Yoko seemed to have an eye to see through such a situation.